Hey there, TouchDesigner developers. DiLaura here with the Interactive and Immersive HQ. In this video, we're going to continue with our artist recreation series by focusing on the work of Ken Knowlton. Ken Knowlton was a computer graphics pioneer at Bell Labs in the 1960s and is famous for creating these large-scale photomosaics that used an early form of basically being able to scan photographic images into the computer and then represent those images using typographic symbols, just like this effect that we've created in TouchDesigner. So we're going to use that premise to build this effect, which can be used, of course, as we can see on my live camera feed, as well as on static images, some classics from the program, as well as, of course, movie files. So it's a lot of fun to put together. Stick around. We're going to dive right into it. Let's start off by taking a look at Ken Knowlton's work. Here he is on the left with collaborator Leon Harmon in the late 60s, and they're standing in front of one of his most famous pieces of artwork. So they call this a computer-produced mosaic, and it is essentially what I was talking about in the intro of the video, in that it was originally a photographic image that has been scanned, although not using anything that would represent or resemble a modern photo scanner, into this early computer system and had that essentially photographic information turned into data, which is then mapped to a series of typographic symbols, essentially based on the darkness or lightness of that particular area of the image. And as we can see here, when we are standing far enough away from that image, we can actually start to make out what was in the original photograph. But the closer you get to the image, you can really start to see those typographic symbols that make it up. So it's a very interesting effect and definitely different from the kind of dithering effects that would come later, and provides a great sort of starting point for us to be able to build something in TouchDesigner that is reminiscent of this look. Ken Knowlton's website is still online, and this gives you an idea of some of the work that he created over the years. So he got really interested in these kind of photo mosaics, and although he continued creating them with the computer, he also started working with different materials as well. So as you'll notice here, this image of the Statue of Liberty is created with seashells rather than computer pixels. So anyway, really interesting guy who has created a large body of work, and you can check out more at Knowltonmosaics.com. This is his kind of art-focused website. And then you can go to KenKnowlton.com to take a look at his personal page as well. All right, so starting with a blank network, we're going to go ahead and begin our project. So the way that this is going to be approached is to first create a rectangle piece of geometry and then a series of instances of that rectangle via a grid SOP. Then we're going to set up a 2D texture array and create a texture coordinate operator that is going to control the texture coordinate of each one of the slices of the grid via the texture itself. So we're going to begin with the rendering pipeline and instancing, and then move on to texturing. So I'll begin with a rectangle SOP, and I'll set the size here to 10 by 10. We're going to essentially use this as a 10 by 10 pixel square. This is going to be what each one of the typographic symbols is essentially placed on. We're going to then connect that directly to a null and then to a geocomp. And this will be where we're going to do our instancing and all of that fun stuff. I'll add a material, which will be a constant, and I'll assign that by clicking and dragging it onto the Geo1 operator and selecting parameter material. After that, we'll add a camera. I'm going to set this camera up so that it is in the orthographic projection mode. and we'll come back to this ortho width parameter in a second. First, however, we need a render top to convert our rendered output to a texture and be able to see it. So this is going to be left actually completely at the default settings. And now we can come back to the camera 1 operator, and we're going to write a little expression here to set the orthographic width to the width of the render top itself. And this will give us a one-to-one relationship between a single pixel and a unit value of 1 in our 3D space. So here in the ortho width parameter, I'm going to click the title there, bring up the drop down. We'll type in op, open and close parentheses, single quotes, render 1 dot par dot resolution W for width. That should give us a value of 1280. Okay, next up, let's go ahead and add our grid SOP to generate some instances. So the size of the grid will be set to 1270 actually, by 710 to account for the fact that we're centering these squares from their center point and the scale of those rectangles. Then we're going to set the number of rows here to 72 and the number of columns to 128. Those are, again, calculated by the fact that we're going to have a 1280 by 720 final output image, and we need to divide that up so that we have rectangles of a size of 10 by 10 pixels. So essentially, we're just dividing the 1280 by 10 and the 72 by 10 to get those final results. I'll then add a null here, and this is going to be the translate values for the instancing setup. So I'll call that null space T. Back over in Geo1, I'm going to head to the instance page. I'll turn instancing on, and then we'll drag null T onto translate operator. Now here I want to go ahead, and grab the P0 channel for translate X, P1 for translate Y, and P2 for translate Z, even though this is, of course, just a flat plane. That should have then filled the render completely with white for the moment, but that will change once we start to assign a texture to this material. Speaking of textures, let's go ahead and add in our input image to the project now. I'm going to head to the top page in the op create dialog and grab the movie file in operator. Then I'm going to leave this at the default banana image for now. I'm then going to attach a resolution top afterwards. And I want to make sure, because we're kind of hard coding this to output at a specific resolution with a specific number of rows and columns, and the sizing is all set up to output at 1280 by 720. I also want to make sure that our input image that we're going to be mapping essentially will also be output at that resolution. So in this resolution operator, I'm going to come to the comment page and I'll set the output resolution here to custom resolution. I'll then set this to 1280 by 720. And although we don't technically need it in this case, the high quality resize, which would be used if we were downscaling the image, might be worthwhile to turn on. But for this example, we don't need it. Now I'll attach a null. This is going to be called null space input. So now let's go ahead and start modifying this texture. I'm going to work again with the resolution top, but this time we're going to use it to actually scale down the size of the image to give us a kind of pixelation effect. So I'm going to turn the high quality resize on because we are going to be downscaling. And then what I want to do here is divide the input resolution by 10. We don't have an option for that here, unfortunately, so we're going to do a custom resolution. And in this case, I know that because this is a 1280 image, I'm going to want 128 to be the width of the final output. And then again, 720 was the height. So 72 is what I'm going to want for the height there. Now, you might have noticed here that, it looks pixelated, but it's kind of got a smoothing filter applied because we've got interpolate pixels turned on. So I'm going to go ahead and turn those to nearest pixels just so we can get a sharper, more pixelated output. The other thing that I'd like to do here is to set the pixel format to 16-bit float, because we're going to be using this data for texture coordinates later on for a 2D texture array. And we need to have output values beyond the kind of 0 to 1 fixed range that our default state of things will output. So we're going to set that to 16-bit float. Next up, we're going to add in a monochrome top to convert this color image to monochrome. And here, again, this is another kind of nice to have operator that allows us to have a little bit more control over how we are dealing with the image data. It'll basically give us a little bit more tweakability in terms of how the typographic symbols are applied. And we're going to leave this at the default, but it is here in case we want to modify it later on. Then I'm going to add a limit top, and we're going to use this to essentially quantize the grayscale values that are currently contained within this image to apply a sort of posterization or stepping effect. And we're going to come to the quantize page and set quantize value to round. So that's given us, again, that kind of posterization or stepping effect, which is giving us a total of 10 different values in our grayscale output here, which will correspond each to a different typographic symbol. Cool. So that's all set. The final thing I'd like to do before we connect this to our instancing setup is to add a math top. And we're going to use this to increase the output range. So again, we are at this point just generating values between 0 and 1, but because we're going to be applying this and using this with a 2D texture array, we actually need those values to go beyond 0 to 1 and correspond to the total number of essentially slices or stacked images that we want to access. So I know already that I'm going to have a total of 10 different textures that we're going to be utilizing for our final image. So on the range page of the math, I want the output range, instead of falling from 0 to 1, to fall from 0 to 10 instead. Now we're all set with our data here, and this is going to be called our null text coord operator. So because we're going to use it again for modifying the texture coordinates associated with the 2D texture array. So I've got those set up and kind of shifted out of the way a little bit. I'm going to come to the Geo1 comp again, head to the instance 2 page, and here we've got our texture coordinate operator section. Now this isn't going to do anything when we connect this at the moment because we haven't yet created our 2D texture array. However, I will go ahead and drag it onto the texture coordinate operator and then go ahead and grab the, for the W channel here, the red channel of our null texture coordinate operator. Cool, so we've got some data, but now we need the actual 2D texture array, and that means generating some typographic symbols and, of course, the array itself. So the way that we're going to approach this today, just to keep things simple, is to add in a text top. We're going to need a total of 10 of these, and then the easiest way for you all to grab the specific symbols that I'm going to be using is to copy and paste them from the description below the video because they are special characters that it kind of depends on whether you are running Mac or Windows, how you access, and it would just be easier to copy and paste rather than having to figure out how to type them in. So the first symbol that we're going to be using is a dot character, commonly seen as a part of lists like a bullet pointed list. And here within this operator, while we're at it, let's go ahead and set some other settings as well. So I've got my text already set up. I'm going to come to the font page, and I've chosen a font that hopefully will be on everyone's computer, which is simply the Arial font. Nothing special there. I've set then the font size X to 171. I've also set the horizontal align to use text bounding box, and same for the vertical align mode. Then on the color page, I've changed the background alpha to a value of 1 so that we have a black background. And those settings are going to stay the same for the first 5 operators that we are working with. So now I will go ahead and copy and paste that. So we have a total of 5. And then again, I'm going to copy and paste some text in for the text parameter. Our second typographic symbol is a minus sign, but it's not simply the one that you type in. This one is, I believe, from the emoji character set, but regardless, it gives us a kind of thicker and bolder subtraction symbol, or maybe a M dash or N dash or something like that. Anyway, copy and paste it from the description. For the third example, or the third text top, we've got a plus sign. But again, this is a larger scale plus sign than what will normally be delivered from our keyboard. Then we've got a large scale division symbol. And finally, a large scale multiplication symbol. So there are the 5 symbols with a black background and the symbols themselves being white. Now what we're going to do is create essentially the inverse of this. Now there are a couple of ways that we could approach this, but I think just to keep things simple, I'm going to copy and paste these and just change the color settings as a group. So we're going to start off with our X, and then our multiplication symbol, that is, and then our division symbol, plus sign, minus sign, or subtraction. And then finally our bullet point. And for this second set of 5, I'm going to select those as a group. I'm going to come up here first to the font color and set that to black. And then I'm going to come to the background color and set that to white. So there we go. We have a kind of mirrored setup where we're starting with the bullet point, ending with the bullet point, and again, have those 2 kind of different sets of characters. So then what I'm going to do is add a switch top, which will be used to quickly switch between all of these different textures and pack them into a texture array. I'm then going to right click and select all of the text tops, and I'll click and drag from one of them to the input of the switch. Now for our index parameter, I am going to enter in an expression to quickly scroll through the inputs that are available here, which will be connected to the timeline below. For anyone who is photosensitive, this is going to flash through all of those textures very rapidly. So it might be best to turn the viewer in the upper left off. Then what I'll do over here on the index parameter is type in me.time.frame, and we'll see then that the number up top will match the current position in the timeline. Before I forget, I also want to make sure that I am, subtracting 1 from me.time.frame, as the very first index of a switch top, which would be the bullet point at the top there, is index 0, and me.time.frame will output at its lowest a value of 1. Then I'm going to go ahead and connect that to, not a threshold, but a texture 3D top to create a 2D texture array. I'll come to the type parameter and change that to 2D texture array. I'll turn the active switch off, and then I'm going to set the prefill switch to on. Now, the cache size is going to correspond to the total number of textures that we want to have available to us in this case. And again, we have 10 different steps of grayscale values that we're going to be essentially mapping to these textures. We have 10 total textures. So we're going to set this cache size to a value of 10. Now, once you've done that, you're going to go ahead and hit the prefill pulse switch again to reset. And once you've done that, we should have all of the different text tops that we've just set up appearing here in our texture 3D operator. Now I'm going to add a null to the end, and this is going to be our color map. So I'm going to rename that to color map. And finally, I can come back up to the constant and click and drag from null color map onto the color map parameter. And if we take a look at our final render and maybe make that a little bit bigger, you'll see that we have exactly the same thing from the beginning of the video. So we've successfully mapped the grayscale levels in the input image to typographic symbols. And now it's time for you to continue experimenting with this effect by plugging in other images, videos, maybe a webcam to see what sorts of results you can get. Of course, you could also take it further by maybe increasing or modifying the textures that are contained within this 2D texture array. You can also play around with the way that things are being mapped using the monochrome top that we looked at previously. We didn't really play with this much, but using the different options that you have for how the RGB channels are processed will give you really different results in the way that things look. So this is a really interesting stylistic effect. Of course, totally inspired by the work of Ken Knowlton. Highly recommend checking out his work in more detail. Hope you've had fun putting this one together. Looking forward to seeing you in the next video here on the Interactive and Immersive HQ.
Hey folks, thanks for watching. If you like our YouTube content, I highly recommend you check out the Interactive and Immersive HQ Pro. The HQ Pro is the only comprehensive educational resource and community for immersive design, TouchDesigner, and creative tech pros. In the HQ Pro trainings, we cover almost any topic you can think of, and we go way more in depth than we do in our YouTube tutorials. We have a private group where Matthew Reagan, myself, and our other industry veteran and pioneer teachers answer your questions every single day. If that sounds cool, click the link in the description to learn more. And if you enjoyed this video, hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe for more free TouchDesigner and immersive content.